the Harbir Singh Podcast.
Welcome back. It's a huge honor to have Kanwar Singh on today's podcast. It's a really special one. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you share this with as many people as possible, because while he's here, we will really want to make the most of him and make the most of his Sangat in this opportunity, checking out the exhibition and all the other stuff that he has going. So let's get right into it. Thank you for doing this, first of all. I was saying earlier, I know everyone wants to speak to you right now. You have so many things going on and you're making time for this, so we really appreciate it.
No, it's no problem at all.
We actually have a mutual friend. So Woot Singh Azadvi is my cousin.
Oh, right. Yes.
So I was listening to the podcast you did with him, and it was amazing. You really went into some depth on the whole process, which I really enjoyed.
Okay.
That
was a while ago, so I've forgotten everything I said. But
well, I'd recommend it. I'll put it in the show notes so people can go back and listen to that one as well, because I'm hoping that we'll get to talk about some different things today as well as what you're doing in the UK. So let's start with that, if that's okay. What are you doing here?
Okay, so I've been here for about a week now. We arrived in London a week ago to launch a new book, and it's a collection of. I'll just show you the book. It's called Journey of the Mind. And it's really just, it encompasses most of my work, but more so, it's also really about the essential concepts of Sikhi, and essentially really just, it's meant to be a real intro into Guru Nanak Dev Ji's message. And it's supposed to really, like, the hope is that almost anyone could pick this up, read through it and just really grasp why Guru Nanak Dev Ji came to this earth, what their message was, and how to apply that to ourselves, and to just improve the state of our minds, to improve the state of our lives. And a lot of it really tackles, the problems that people face today. So
absolutely. I think that's one of the beautiful things about Guru Nanak Dev Ji's message and Gurbani, is that the Gurus lived it through their life, and they gave examples of practically living what they were talking about. I think that's a really beautiful thing. So if people want to get the book, if they want to see you, where can they? When's this will be out tomorrow, so it will be out in time for the exhibition. So it's actually available for pre-order. So if you go to the website, Without Shape, Without Form, if you go on their website, scroll down, you'll see a link for it. And it's also just going to be available from Amazon, so you can just do a search for it there as well. Okay, brilliant. So anyone who's listening to this, you have to buy that book, whether it's off Amazon or from the website. If you buy it from Amazon, make sure you leave a review, because that really helps get more eyes to the book as well. So as a father, I've got 2 kids and a big family, and I really appreciate there being more literature out there being more high quality stuff, as opposed to just more of the kind of amateur stuff. That my wife actually wrote a book, and it took her about 2 or 3 years, and she got somebody to do the artwork, but she never actually put it out there. So I can appreciate, just from being a husband to somebody who's a creative, how much work this takes. So it's our duty as a community to really get one of these in every household, and especially in schools, because when I went to school in Southall, the Sikh history that we were taught from the teachers was wrong. So the only way we're going to correct that is by getting this to more eyes as possible. So thanks for doing that, Seva. I as a parent, I really appreciate it.
If I can add something, the book was basically, we've made the book as inexpensive as possible. So no one's going to make so much as a penny off of it. The idea was we didn't want people to feel like they couldn't afford it. So for the quality of the book, the size of it, full color, everything, it's basically just, it couldn't be more accessible. So, and I think it'll, once we start putting it out there, I think it's going to go fast. So
absolutely. And can people pick it up when they come to see you in Birmingham?
Yeah, so I think it will be available here as well. So so we can talk about the exhibit, and then the book relates to the exhibit, but it's also sort of separate from it. So.
Can we talk about the exhibit?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will definitely. I would love to talk about the exhibit. So and I mean, some people may have seen the Without Shape, Without Form gallery in Slough, so they'll have a little bit of a sense of where we're starting from. But this exhibition is designed as a traveling exhibit, and we want to hit up as many cities over the next couple of years in the UK as possible. We're also hoping to go to Canada, the US, some places in Europe as well. It's all kind of just falling into place. But this is going to be the only time we're going to be in Birmingham. So if you are in the area, I do encourage you to come down. We're here till December 9th. December 4th. So you have a little bit of time. But there's a lot of other like programming in and around that. So it's really a good idea to go to the Without Shape, Without Form website and just dig into what we've got going on. The exhibit itself is going to be a little bit different than what we have in Slough. Because it's a traveling exhibit, we've had to reformat it. We really want it to be super accessible to anybody walking in. We're not framing the exhibit so much as this is an exhibition on Sikh history. It's really more about Guru Nanak Dev Ji's message and how that message can be assumed and related, and how people can connect to it, and in very simple ways. In very sort of, so we're addressing it with just really essential concepts like justice. How does that relate to leading a spiritual life? How does, how do we engage with a sense of justice? How do we engage with a sense of equality? How do we engage with inner peace? So these are just, essentially they're just such core messages, and we're seeing, we're sort of getting into what are the struggles people have today, and what are the struggles people had throughout Sikh history, and how they were able to find the strength, where they got that ability to cope with so much, and then hopefully people will walk in and get a sense of Sikh history for sure, get a sense of Sikh religion, but also really, really we want people to get a sense of like, how do I apply this to me?
That's amazing on so many levels. I'm thinking of, in my lifetime, I don't remember an exhibit like that going kind of internationally, of this caliber. So, it's taken us a long time as a community, and obviously God to bless you with this seva to get to this point. So it's a very exciting time for me as a parent and as a Sikh to have this, to actually show people, okay, look at this. And if you want to know what Sikhs are, what they're about, then this is a good place to start. And I think with everything that's going on around in the world, and lots of political stuff and lots of different types of issues, I think having a refocus on central concepts around the way of life, the Sikh way of life, I think is a beautiful thing. I'm sure the kids will enjoy it, as well as the adults and the elderly as well. So my next question was, so what are the dates of the exhibition? I'll put everything in the description box as well. And I looked at the links. You have to book on as well. So make sure you book on, so you don't go there and get disappointed because there's not enough spaces. So it is free, but you do need to book. So I'm planning on being there. And so what are the dates? I know you said you're here till the 4th of December.
Yeah. So we've got a few different events going on. We've got so the art exhibit is from the 18th to December 4th. So you have time to in your calendar, anywhere between there, you can come check it out and it'll be open. on top of that, we've got another talk that we're doing, which is going to be this Thursday. And this is just myself and sitting up within alongside Deep Core, who's the person who's really like created this exhibition, like really like I mean, I'm the one who I paint and I create these images, but they're sort of like, you know, it's just this painting's about this painting's about that. And what Deep has done, like she's curated all of that, and she's really focused on how to sort of like incorporate like sort of the messaging to bring that in. And it's been a whole group alongside with her, but she has sort of that vision to really sort of create these spaces and then to sort of just create the overall experience. So so yeah. So basically this Thursday at 5:30, it's you can come and check out this talk, and we're going to just be talking about process for myself, the process of like you know, sort of the creativity aspect of like, you know, being a creative, but also having kind of a spiritual side to yourself, how those two relate. Yeah, we're just going to be unpacking a lot of stuff like that. It's pretty informal, but you do have to sort of like sign up for tickets. So
Absolutely. That sounds really interesting. So that kind of brings me to some of the questions that I had. So prior to obviously getting involved with Guru Manya Granth Gurdwara and the kind of the creation aspect of it, you were creating artwork, Sikh artwork, and you know, if as a parent, as a family man, you know, that's probably not the like most lucrative line you could go down, right? You could become a business lawyer or something else. So what kind of drove you? What was the impetus to go down a path where actually there was no path prior to you doing this?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I'm not going to say that I had like a whole lot planned out. At the beginning, I was running on a lot of inspiration. And the inspiration was just, you know, when I read Sikh history, I was just blown away by it. And I saw these incredible visuals. And also as a visual artist, being able to like mine something that's been barely touched is just really, it's really interesting. You know, it's like a whole playground all for yourself, you know? So initially I just started with that, and I'll be honest, I was quite happy just to sort of see what came of it. I didn't know what level of artwork I would be able to create. I didn't know if people would be interested. So if anything, it was really just for my own pursuit. But after that, it became like, you know, as you know, I engaged more with Sangat and people responded really positively to the work. It sort of just built piece by piece. I mean, I would be dishonest to say that I had some sort of vision. But if I ever did have sort of like a vision of where it could go, I mean, that's kind of happening right now with the gallery event at the Birmingham Library. Because I just went to get just to check it out now. We're still in the process of just like installing it. So, but it just looks really slick. It looks so professional. And I don't know, I've never seen like anything of ours, like from the Sikh, like that's coming from the arts, the Sikh community, ever done that really, really high standard. And that's really the mission here of the whole group, the whole gallery, without shape, without form. All they want to do is say, we have this great message. Let's put it out there in just the most beautiful way possible. And I'm just really happy to be a part of that.
Mm. It's really inspiring, not just from the context of it, but just the kind of forest from the trees is, you know, you did something that you wanted to do for yourself, not to make money, but just for your own pursuit, and it turned out to be something that you actually are able to do for the last 15 years.
Yeah,
so that's incredible. Are you at the point where it's still interesting in terms of like 15 years in? I've been doing my job for about that long, and Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, he says when you get to that mark, you're kind of looking at, okay, a second career, let me do something else because I'm getting a bit bored of the first. But that's for probably mainstream professions. What's it like for you as a creative? How do you keep it kind of fresh?
No, I think that's just as true for creatives too. One of the things that I've seen happen with a lot of artists that I admired, and this is probably the same with most professions. What happens is you get comfortable, right? And you get comfortable in your sort of style. You get comfortable to the point where, if you do X, Y, Z, you can rely on a certain amount of income coming in, and that's easy. But what I try to do is I just force myself to take like hard right turns, or just like I won't let myself be comfortable. So I don't know. I know people won't really get a sense of that when they look at my work, because even in a gallery, they might see my work arranged chronologically by the date of the events that I'm showing, but that's not necessarily how I painted them. But if you were to arrange my work in the order that I painted them, you would see that I keep doing like very strange directions in stylistically, and so I've been doing that for a while. I challenged myself to be very different, like to keep tweaking things, to keep changing things up. And now it's actually getting to be the point where I'm stepping away from simply telling sort of the known history and some of the messages behind it, to really trying to engage with the more abstract concepts within Sikhi and how those things inform us, So I don't really know what I'm going to be doing from a year from now. I have ideas laid out, and I'm working with the group at the gallery. There's ideas they want me to explore as well. I mean, they don't really direct what I should paint, but it's like we talk about like concepts, ideas, wouldn't it be great if we did a series on something like this? And then they just let me go ahead and do it. But more and more, we're really getting into like things that are, it's almost like they're pushing more into an abstract territory. There's things that are more like sort of mental ideas, mental
Subtle.
concepts, that are very difficult to like. They're not as straightforward, as drawing like, charging horses and battles and, that sort of thing. So definitely I've been moving more and more into that.
That's amazing. And in terms of spiritually, what's your journey been like? Because there's a lot in terms of from kind of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy on giving the mind space and taking things out from the subconscious, and even with kind of scientific breakthroughs that will often happen while people are running or when they're not in actually a work mode. So growing up, I would always see this image of Guru Nanak Dev Ji and an image of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and the elder generation, like my grandparents at least, thought that was an accurate depiction of what they look like. But how do you draw from your subconscious to paint these images of people who we don't have any kind of accurate images of, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I know that is something that I do get asked. I think the easiest way I can say it is I really don't get hung up on it. So when I see the painting, I mean, people say, oh, it's a painting of Guru Gobind Singh, and they say this is how you drew their face. What I try to think of it more is I'm trying to think about, the whole painting. So sometimes, for instance, even the way I designed the landscape around a particular figure, the mood of the landscape, and very often it's a poetic way to tell what's going on in the painting. It relates to the frame of mind of the individual. So if I do a painting of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, and it's his last battle, and the sun is setting, and there's all these forces arrayed against him. There's just, so it's the sunset, the water, everything, the mood of that relates to his sense of resilience, that even in those last, coming to the end of his sort of mission on Earth, it just relates to his frame of mind, So a lot of the paintings I think, like, I don't get hung up on the faces. It's just as a point where it feels right to me. I mean, if you really look at my painting, say I've had 3 or 4 paintings of Guru Singh, I'm not even sure if they really look like it's the same person. There is a connection, like physical features. I don't even try to really keep them that consistent. So it's really more about the message behind that piece, the mood that I'm trying to create. So when I do the painting, which we titled it just Mitra Pyare Nu, of Guru Gobind Singh in the Machwar, in the jungle, right? A lot of that is stepping into this zone of, the background is very, I mean, some people like when they first heard it, it's like, oh, that's very sort of psychedelic. They don't know that's the word they'll use, but really it was more about like, I used a lot of, the trees, the way they were very kind of like, just sort of, how to describe it. It was just sort of like the environment kind of clawed at you. It was a hostile, oppressive, strange sort of space. But then you have Guru Sahib in the middle of it in a state of absolute peace. So, the balance of that and how that related to the event, to the Bani, that was more important than specifically how I portrayed their face,
That's really interesting. And I really like that answer, because it's more about the message as opposed to, looking at history and looking at, what color how big their head circumference was, or the shape of their nose and that type of thing. So that's really interesting. There's a Singh called Devinder Singh, who's a historian, and he's collected artwork from Guru Sahib's time, and he's got some of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and depending on the artist, he looks completely different. So the Chinese artists have painted him looking oriental, and so depending on the artist, the image is completely different. So it's not so much, you were saying something similar, it's not so much about whether it's an accurate portrayal of his facial expression of features. It's more about the story that image is trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if I think that's what, like, I don't think they would want anyone to focus on how they looked at, or how they look. They'd want to focus on the message. So I try to just do the same. I have the same approach with the artwork. And somehow it works. And somehow it falls into place.
Yeah, I think the older generation easily get attached to the image. I think it's easily done. And my gran, for example, she talks about Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and all these Set Changisi, and I was like, he did a yatre. He hardly ate. It's unlikely that he was obese and plump like the old photos of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So I think context is important as well. So in terms of meditation, is a big thing now in the West, and obviously it's the key concept in Sikhi, and lots of people look at flow states and how to get into a place where you can focus your mind and reduce the rumination and the clutter of the mind. And so how is creating art, is that like a meditative process, or is it other things that you do to get yourself in the zone? How does it work?
What I've found is that when you're creating art, you're creating it not simply when you're actually in the physical, like you're just drawing or painting, whatever your art form is. A lot of the art, the ideas form in the spaces and times in between. So it is really important for myself to try and find like just time when just I can be in that meditative state, like for me, like, in the summertime, it's just, I'm an avid gardener. I love um, landscaping, and I like doing that. And mostly it's because everybody else around me hates it. So I get to just quietly, but it allows me, you're working with your hands, you're doing something that doesn't require a lot of mental energy. And then it just allows you to relax. And then I find that those are the times where I might have been painting, like, the day before or earlier in the day, and I got to a point and I don't know what I'm doing next. And one of the things I had to learn is when to stop, because it's better to stop than go, like, 20 miles in the wrong direction than have to backtrack. So then I would stop, and then I would just do these things that put me in a state where I could sort of reflect, these ideas could just sort of percolate in the back of my mind. And often then the solution will present itself. So that might be, for me, it's not so much the actual act of meditation. I'm just sort of the beginning of my Simran practice, and I'm trying to get there. I have a very hard, I struggle with that, always have. I almost have to trick my mind to get into that state. So by doing something with my hands, by doing something that just doesn't engage my mind too much, I fall into it, So, and that's when a lot of the art does happen. So it's really important to find those spaces for yourself.
And I think there's an epidemic of not doing that, because it, not for yourself, but for the general population, it's easy to get distracted. There's so many shiny objects. There's social media. There's Netflix. You could waste away years just in a zombie mode of being engaged in these things and not actually really engaging with what am I feeling, what's going on in my head, ideas, concepts like life, family, other things around you. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting how you kind of haven't fallen victim to that as much as the rest of us. And that kind of sorry.
Yeah. I think a little bit of that is just generational. I think I'm just a little bit older. I grew up just before, like, internet really blew up. So I think I did a lot of my learning when there wasn't as many options for distraction. I don't know how I'd even approach my art right now. I see a lot of times, especially with Instagram, it's almost the worst kind of environment to release your art, because the very idea of spending months on something that somebody else is going to, like, gaze at for a few seconds and then just move on to the next thing. It's very, you really want to create art where people can really look at it, reflect on it. That's why having it in a gallery and having these places are more and more important, because we're not just creating. It's not just me creating the art. A lot of times, I'm almost embarrassed by how much people will credit me for the whole thing. But even if you've gone to the gallery itself, so much thought was put into how we can create a space where people can walk in. It's almost like you're not allowed to see everything all at once. You walk in, you see one piece, you read about it, reflect on the body, and then you move on to the next. It forces you to slow down. Galleries are great that way. It stops you from charging through, so I think with social media and the world we live in right now, I don't know really what kind of art we're going to get in the future, because for a lot of artists, it's almost there's a disincentive to spending a long time on your art. If there's more of an incentive to spending more time on self-promotion.
Absolutely.
Less time on art, but I don't know how that plays out, because in your art, I don't know how good your art can get. Your focus has to be on that. So it's really challenging.
In terms of the research in neuroscience, and there's been a few whistleblowers from Instagram and Facebook, some executives who are kind of anti-social media now, and what they're saying is that really, especially with young people, they should go off social media for 6 months, form their own opinions and ideas about things, and then see what kind of space they have for social media. Otherwise, their minds are being manipulated in a way that we're just all becoming carbon copies of whatever we're being fed in terms of the algorithm, and we're being manipulated in a sense. So I think there's a lot of people copying other people's work because that's what they're seeing, and that's a shortcut to looking like you know what you're doing and you're good at what you're doing. But as a few years ago, I used to go to the V&A a lot, and they have a big Muslim exhibition in terms of the Islamic artwork and even carpets and all sorts of different types of forms of art. And there's Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne there, and there's maybe a handful of Shastra, but that was it. Yeah. So the thoughtful pieces of work that you're creating are going to stand the test of time, because it's not something you can just mock up on a computer program by typing in a few instructions and copying and pasting a turban on somebody here and there. So so I think it's important to appreciate that somebody is doing that deep work.
Yeah, because a lot of times when I set out to do a particular piece, it's not like I've got it all worked out in my head. So it's a journey for myself. So in that process, I will end up like unlocking ideas, unlocking things that were I had no idea could go in there. I mean, I remember I did this painting, the painting of the Shote Sahibzade, and the way I've composed it is you're sort of like almost like an X-ray, but you're seeing inside where they are as well as what's happening on the outside, right? So that was sort of a tricky way to convey that to the audience, that they're being bricked alive, but you're able to see them. But what the scene is where the last brick is falling into place, and the light inside is diminishing. But naturally, I noticed that when I did it, the light becomes triangular, across their chest, and they're wearing like their clothing was yellow, and it looked exactly like a nishan. It was just something that just happened. It wasn't like I didn't come up with the idea, but in the process of doing that. So when you do a painting, it takes several months to do. You work on it, you put it away, you bring it back. Things like that happen, and then you play those things up. And most of the time, and because it was subtle, because it wasn't planned, most people don't even see that. When they see it, they can't unsee it, So a lot of interesting thing happens in art when it's done in a slow, measured way. And now I just, it's a really tricky space to figure out, how do you allow that to happen? It's almost like, I don't know if a lot of artists even realize that's an option, but if you really want to know the secret to good art, it's boredom. Just be bored. So I don't actually keep Instagram, or I don't even keep a phone. Actually, it annoys the heck out of people, because you're just practically an alien now if you don't have a phone.
I could vouch for that. I have to communicate. I have to message your wife if I want to contact you.
Exactly. I stopped. I tried it for a while, but I just found that my brain didn't work the same way, and I just wasn't having the same sort of thoughts. I would go on Instagram and just be scrolling, and just an hour would go by, because, it's like, oh, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool. There's just no sort of space for that. So I think just it's a big deal, but just don't keep your phone on you,
Absolutely. I think it's going to be difficult for people to think and have breakthroughs in what they're doing if they engage with technology too much. It's going to diminish the capacity for breakthroughs in whatever field, I think. So thinking is, I think, a lost art. So it's
Yeah.
good that you put systems in place and protocols in place to maintain that ability to be able to think and reflect and reiterate. So I think that we all need that, and this podcast is aimed at the younger generation to inspire the younger generation. So it's more pertinent for them, even more pertinent for them. So that kind of ties into the next question around your processes around productivity and getting a piece of work done, traveling. With all you mentioned the potential for international, taking this exhibition internationally. How do you kind of protect your time? You've mentioned you don't have the phone with you. You've got gardening, which is a great outlet to be able to have loads of positive influences on the mind without kind of taking you into a negative rabbit hole. So are there any other productivity tips that you can give to creatives?
I mean, I'd have to get specific into as a painter, right? But I definitely take the opportunity to just go to galleries, even galleries I've been to. I mean, if you live in London, you're very, very lucky. You're a lot luckier than anyone who lives in Canada, where there's not much, you know? So whatever your thing is, just find time to immerse in that, and not necessarily just what's good contemporary, like not what's good right now, because one of the things you realize is, as a painter, you realize it is like the painter you thought was a good painter was actually just a slick, simplified version of a much better painter. And as you start to do that journey and you really find who are the absolute geniuses and you start to soak that in, it's even like nothing you have to do actively. You just go, you walk through galleries, you just absorb it. And some of that just filters into you, Every time I step out of a gallery, I problems, because I'll come in with ideas that are percolating in my brain. How do I do this? How do I do that? And that's becoming more and more of a concern for me now, in the sense that I'm forcing myself to step into a very difficult or more challenging space with a lot more abstract ideas, so I try to absorb just the greats all the time. And a lot of that is that also means you got to shut off the ego a bit. You've got to shut off that part of you is worried about, because here's the other horrible part about spaces like Instagram. You're not as concerned about your art. You're more concerned about how it's received, what people think about it. So it's like you want to get that sort of juice. You want to just get kind of like that
Validation.
The validation. And if you're searching for validation, the problem is you will only create work that is, it's very short term. It's not like you're not having a conversation, because that's what art is. It's a form of conversation with an audience in a way that you have a hard time maybe verbalizing. So as a painter, it's easier for me to get ideas across than it is for me to say them. I'm actually pretty terrible at like trying to explain my paintings. I've often been at galleries where I've my work is up and somebody will come up and they will just start like talking about the piece to me. I'm like, I was like, I wish I could, like, why can't I put those words together, but it's, they get it, and it's having that connection, and so I don't know, a lot of that comes from not seeking to do work that you necessarily get validation for, not necessarily seeking to do work that you get that is going to make X amount of dollars. Because a lot of my paintings, my favorite paintings are paintings that are of my own, are ones that are not, like, they're really well received from an emotional level, but they're not essentially paintings that are commercial. They're not paintings that people are going to put them up on walls. So, there are a lot of more harsher paintings, I should say, like the painting of Jaswant Singh Kalra, talking about the post-1984 years, what happened in Punjab. It's a really brutal painting, but I wanted it to be brutal. I want it to be almost like you're tearing the skin off something, so you could expose the rawness, you know. So the colors reflect that, the scenery reflects that. Like every piece of that painting is taken from a photograph. Every bit of it is a reference to a real person, a real event, something that happened. Talking about all the young kids who were disappeared, the young Singhs, and you have how you have like you've seen it on Instagram where their parents are elderly parent, they're elderly now, but they're holding pictures of their son. I took a lot of those. I had them up everywhere around me in my studio. So in the painting, he's Jaswant Singh Kalra is sort of walking in this very dark space, and these photographs are blowing all around him. So each one of those photographs is a photograph of somebody who's disappeared. There's just like there's scenes of the sort of the encounter killings happening in the background. There's in the sky behind, it just sinks into sort of this red sunset, and it's sort of like the sun. There's the pinpoint of light at the back, which references like this last speech he gave, which talks about like that light dying, darkness descending, and the necessity to shine a light against that. The sky behind him, it's black and it's ravaged and it's red, and it's just scarred with bodies, and all of those are photos, just arranged in such a way which talked that was the force that drove him, that knowledge of what had been happening. I mean, ultimately he tried his best to get the message out about what was happening in the Punjab, and then when he went back, he became a victim of that same that same genocide. So that I suppose, trying to get back to your original point, but all of that, like that took months and months of work. I'm very proud of that painting. It's not a painting that many people will ever put out, but it's a painting that a lot of people will connect with. It will resonate with. So so that kind of work happens when you kind of really slow things down, and when you don't think about, well, what's the end goal here? From like, what am I getting out of it? Is this the right career move? Whatever. Because any one piece may not be, but then you create like a body of work, and the body of work reflects you as an artist. Some things will support you commercially, but other things will really tell the story of who you are as a creative person.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a beautiful message as well for the people who are going to be listening to this, because with a lot of the youth that I talk to now, they're looking at professions as, which professions will earn me the biggest paycheck. So they're looking at finance, they're looking at, investment banking and accounting and that type of thing. And then I see them years later and they're not fulfilled in their jobs, or there's no satisfaction in it. So
I meet a lot of rich people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do I. So I think it's really important if you're going to dedicate your life to something, if you're going to put 15 years of hard graft into something like you've done, you want it to be something that you can, rest your head at night and feel like actually that was purposeful and that meant something. So that's what's your exercise routine like? I know you had to see a chiropractor because you spent so long painting. Remember listening to your podcast, but how do you? It's obviously a sedentary job. How do you manage to maintain your health?
I probably should be doing a lot more, frankly. I think my main thing is actually just it's kind of, again, to find those meditative spaces. So I'm lucky to live in an area where there's a lot of trails. So I just do a lot of walking. That at least, so right now my goal even on this trip is, no matter what's going on, I try to like my wife and I, we try to walk like 10K a day, right?
It's amazing.
So it's just that I've always had a really hard time with like sort of formal exercise, you know, and I'm trying to get there because I know as you get like older, you really got to push yourself. You got to push those weights, you know. But mostly it's just things like walking. It's things like just moving about because it is a difficult job. Art is a difficult job. I mean, I think people see one side of it. They see, oh, you're in London, you're having an event, you got this gallery. They see a lot of people around you. But you go from like, I go from having a gallery event with this, you know, several hundred people, lots of people want to talk to me, and you're sort of really swamped. And I try to engage with people as much as I possibly can because I've had people that, you know, booked a flight from India just to come down just for one event. So it's not, you know, I feel wretched if I don't give them at least, you know, a little bit of time and I want to talk to them, you know. But at the same time, you go from that, then you go back to your studio and it's just, frankly, it's just you know, and, you know, your equipment to create the work. And it's a simple room. It's like, you know, and it can be a lonely space, quite honestly. You know, when you're really feeling the work flowing, you don't notice it, time goes by. There's a lot of time when nothing's working, you know, and then you have a lot of self-doubt. So there's a lot of really strange highs and lows that you kind of have to get your mind around. And I think that's more and more like meditation is just, it's really good to kind of balance those out, to not feel too high, you know, when everything's going on around you, and then not feel too low, because there's sort of this misconception of the sort of portrait artist. And there is some validity to that, where if you are like, there are paintings when I was feeling very low, sometimes they like, you know, I would engage in that space, but it's a dangerous space. Very often I would find that, like when I did the painting Just Once in Color, it's not like, it brought me even lower, you know, because the content is heavy. And I kind of just went into it just brazenly. I wanted to be as real as possible. But when you're sitting there and you're staring at a painting of someone who's been murdered, right? And I had like so many of these photographs, and then you're sitting there and you're carefully painting, you know, their eyelid, their face, their lips, you know, like it kind of did a psychological number on me, and I just didn't really address that. I wish I had, when I was doing that painting, had just been really more focused on meditation, because then it would have pulled me out of that space. So that painting really just, not only was a very challenging painting emotionally, but it really ground me down, you know. And it took me a while to I had to basically just not do any work for a while, just to kind of get back to sort of, you know, just sort of a better mental state. Because the thing is, when you do a piece and it's in front of you, it's kind of like, it's like your whole vision. And it's like you're really feeling that work. You can be in a flow state, but at the same time, it can really be tugging at you. It can really be, it's not necessarily just like positive. Like, you know, your mental space may not be like in a really positive space just because you're in a flow state. Because if you're tackling something that's really heavy, that's really hard, it's going to grind at you. I mean, you don't realize it first, you know, but it's slowly grinding at you, and then you feel really worn out.
Absolutely. So there is some neuroscience on when you're thinking through something, like if you're in, they use the example of sports. So they would have someone shoot jump shots, for example, and they'll go through it in their mind, and they put them in a functional MRI scanner, and just thinking through that whole movement lights up the exact same areas in the brain as physically doing it does. Right. So thinking about something that's happened or reading something can have a similar impact on someone's brain as actually experiencing that thing. So if you're in that state for months, it's it takes a lot of incredible amount of resilience to do what you've done. I'm fragile. I'll read something and I'll say to my wife, "Oh, don't tell me about that." It's just too much. It's just too much.
There's stuff I can't read about. Like, I mean, as a Canadian, we have like this very dark history that's coming out more and more about the residential school system. And it's no matter how people frame it, essentially, it was just, it was, over 150 years, it was just a plan to eliminate a culture, you know. And I can't read about that stuff because I particularly connected to what happened to the Punjab, what I think is still happening right now. I think we are, Sikhs are, especially in the Punjab, I do feel like there's an intent to erase us.
Yeah, I think they've got a bit smarter about it as well. They're using different tactics. So it's less fake encounters and more, get people onto alcohol, get people onto drugs.
Yeah.
Water down the faith of the people. And then it's very easy to get them to do whatever you want. And if they're not fighting, if they're fighting amongst each other, they're not going to be fighting for a cause, or they're not going to see the bigger picture of what's happening. And it's happened to blacks in America, right? If you look at prohibition of marijuana, now it's legalized in California, and there's people who are still serving life sentences for marijuana possession. So
absolutely, that community suffered, and then whereas you have like like the other communities that are like now profiting off of it,
absolutely,
and it's like
big business, it's billion-dollar
big business now, right? And it's just another method in which to like fog people's minds. It's just another drug that's put out there to stop us from thinking, and that's why more and more just the direction that I've taken with Gurmani Radhkudwar, just this focus on meditation, this focus on strengthening the mind. I mean, that's why this exhibit is called Journey of the Mind. It's not like the history of the Sikhs. It's like the journey, the inner journey that they undertook to get where they got to accomplish these things, to endure and thrive in the environment that they were thrust into. So I think it's just, there's so much out there now that is just deliberately trying to turn us into mindless zombies.
And I really like the way, to put a positive, bring it back to something positive, I really like the way the exhibition is framed, because I work in a hospital and I interact with lots of different communities. People see a beard and a turban, they want to know what is that about. And it's really nice to have something which is a bit less Punjabi and a bit more mainstream, so you can say, well, if you want to learn about it, this is a good resource to look into. So from a kind of being in London, Slough is the most diverse Greater London borough in the whole of the UK, and London is the most diverse, central London. So there's I think Slough has something like 56 different types of nationalities, communities, and ethnic groups. So to have something like that resource is really powerful, and to frame it when you're looking at the journey of the mind and that type of thing, it can, a lot more people can connect with it than just having Sikh history. So I think that's really beautiful. And when before I got into Sikhi, because I had cut hair and used to be just normal Punjabi guy, and I was really interested in different faiths. I used to read up on, I read up on Islam, I read up on Christianity, King James Bible, and Book of Genesis, and the Buddhist literature, and Judaism, and so to have like an actual your worthy resource from a Sikh perspective is really really valuable, because I think we can go too far in kind of like, I think the generation, in terms of my kids' generation and my generation, we want to have something that we can believe. And I think you can go so far into the story, and the story can, sometimes when I hear a story, I think that doesn't sound believable. But when you look at Gurbani, and when you actually connect it to Gurbani, and you look at the actual like there's a video I've seen online, and it's a Buddhist monk, and out of protest he puts petrol over himself and he sets fire to himself. So there was a narrative a while ago saying, how could Guru Arjan Dev Ji give Shahidi? And there were a few pracharaks who were saying, oh, he was screaming when he was made Shaheed. So when you look at these Buddhist monks, who this person wasn't any guru, he wasn't a particularly like senior Buddhist monk. He was just somebody who had spent his life in meditation. And you see, actually, these things are possible. They're still happening today. So, you know, to kind of come at it from a mind perspective, as opposed to, you know, this person had a sword which weighed this much and he was just, you know, he was just that good of a fighter. And it just doesn't have the real, I think the message gets a little bit lost.
Well, that it really gets to the idea of the universality of this message, because you're seeing it play out. That's a perfect example when that Buddhist monk can just do that and just sit there, you know, while it's just engulfed in flames, and you're just thinking like, wow, right? That talks about the strength of the mind, you know, and that's like, you know, when you talk, you know, we can sort of like, sometimes we frame a lot of history in a very sort of machismo kind of way, and we have sort of a skewed idea of what strength and power is. That's power. What the gurus demonstrated to us, what Guru Arjan demonstrated was this is the power of the mind, you know.
Yeah,
and the fact that this is attainable. You know, like we all have that.
And also the power of restraint, right? Because there were things that they could have, you know, they could have gone to war over things. They could have, you know, they could have been a lot of, the decisions could have been a lot more self-centered, but they weren't. They were looking at actually what is God's will. It's not, you know, this person did this to me, so now I'm going to do this to them. It was very much living Gurbani and Tera Pana Meetha Lage, and how they showed that. They, you know, when Guru Amardas Ji was kicked, he didn't say, you know, that's it, I'm going to punch you in your face now, the kind of thing that you and I would do, or I would do. But it was, you know, did you hurt your foot? So that Nimrata was embodied in the actions. So I think it's something beautiful that you're doing. You have kids.
Actually, no, the point that you were making, though, I just wanted to add something to that. One of the things that we've done with the gallery in Slough and here is we were creating specific new paintings, like that sort of that people won't have seen. So, for instance, there is a painting in Slough that it's not anywhere else, which is just of Guru Arjan's Shahidi. And that point is, so in it, while, you know, even though he's sitting on that hot plate, right? It's like his posture is one of absolute strength. And then he's making a gesture, which is like this, which is, and to settle the crowd, because he's all around him. You see people, like just the impressions of figures that are like rioting, and, you know, there's a lot of turbulence happening around him, because the story that I've understood was Guru Arjan's followers said that, look, just give the signal, we'll riot, you know, we'll get you out of there, just give the signal. And he's just saying no, you know, he's telling them that this is for him to do. So that, you know, I just wanted to get back to that. So that's what's been really good, is I've been challenged to do a lot of pieces that are really specific to some of these stories. And it's been really good to be able to weave them into the narrative of my wider work as well. So I'm actually just really enjoying. And so getting back to your earlier question about, you know, 15 years later, how do you find motivation? A lot of it is just collaboration is really good, because sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on the creative as the individual, you know, this painter created these paintings, and we kind of sort of fetishize that idea of a person doing everything solo. But for me, it's been just really amazing to sort of come into it with whatever I have, but then just sort of get some guidance on, you know, really important events and how to, like, you know, how to think about them, you know, And so it just gets back to sort of like, it's finding collaborative spaces, but the people who are very creative in their own way can really just, you can just create some really beautiful work, and you can really just progress, in ways you just can't do on your own. So that's where things are with that.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a Steve Jobs interview about connecting the dots, and he was saying you can't connect the dots going forwards, but you can connect the dots going back. So if you hadn't put those hundreds of hours of hard graft in, I don't think the Guru Manya Granth, would be aware of the kind of like the potential to collaborate. And because you have to be, you are obviously of a certain caliber of an artist for them to think, actually, let's invest all this time, let's invest all of this thought into, exhibiting this in the best possible way that we can, and getting the most eyes on this as possible.
Yeah, I'm really humbled by actually the amount of people, and people use that word. I'm really humble, but
yeah, and we've
really
been there, and the queues out the door. You have to wait for hours sometimes to even
but
get
I'm
in.
really humbled by the there's so many people that are doing work behind the scenes that won't get any credit for it, but which even included just packing 3 lorry loads of material, like on Sunday night, and getting it here like crack of dawn, because they wanted to drive slowly and carefully. The last thing they wanted to do was having this work jostled and damaged. All it took to unpack that, they've been working like 2-3 days now just to set it up perfectly. I mean, and there was someone just going around just cleaning every little tile and everything, and it was just incredible. So there's a lot of people that are doing so much seva to make this happen. So I'm really hoping that a lot of people will come out to Birmingham and check this out.
I'm confident they will. I can guarantee it, because what you have is a beautiful thing, and the Midland Sangat is also, generally from my experience growing up in the UK, living here my whole life, they are appreciative of when there's things like this. So I think you're going to be a very busy person. Books, are you a reader? Are you an avid reader? I know you mentioned reading history books kind of got you into it at the start. Can you recommend any books, or are books really not your thing?
Actually, no. I would say that I'm one of those people that fall into the trap of collecting books that I never get to read, because I used to be a far more avid reader before. But what happens when you get into your work, you tend to more and more, but you kind of found your thing, so it takes up more and more of your time, and getting yourself to sort of like sit down and say, no, I'm going to read for a few hours. It's always a bit challenging, because I'd rather just take those 3 hours to just work. But some of the books that have really interested me have been things that I, like as far as novels go, there's a really famous, well-known African writer that almost no one outside of Africa seems to know about, but his name is Usman Sembene, and he wrote this beautiful book about Africa when in sort of, I think it's set in the 1950s, because I read this a while ago, and it's called God's Bits of Wood. And it's just basically about like their struggle to get rid of French colonialism, so I really just write. I like to read. If I do read stuff, I like to read stuff which throws me into an experience that I almost know nothing about, So that's just one random book. Another great book that I love is a writer named Rohinton Mistry. He was actually he was very successful, but he was actually the husband of my English lit teacher in high school.
Oh wow!
So he actually handed me my diploma when I graduated. But yeah, he was on Oprah and everything. So he did a fantastic book called A Fine Balance. That's one. I think that was his third book, and probably my favorite one. So it's just, and this was set in, and this is actually it's set in India in the 70s. And it touches on sort of the struggle of lower caste communities, and it actually ends closer to the events of 84. And it's really, it's such a sort of photograph of what a sort of meat grinder, the culture of the subcontinent can be to the sort of less desired communities, so that's, again, I would thoroughly, if you want a really nice solid read, which will probably both inspire and scar you, that's a great one.
That's two books that I've never heard of, so thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. It's a sensitive topic, so I appreciate if you don't want to talk about it, but I heard you experience some of it of 84 on Azadvi's podcast. So do you mind touching on, because you were a kid at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, so my memories of it are not like so stark, but it's that when those very formative, my earliest memories, so when I was age 7. So that's, when you think back, that's kind of when your earliest memories are sort of forming. So we lived in Amritsar. So I have memories of Amritsar and Punjab just prior to that. Around 83 to 84 is the earliest memories that I have. And we used to, my parents owned a hotel just on the periphery of Harmandar Sahib complex. And so I have a lot of memories. My granddad used to sort of like help manage that because my father he worked overseas. So, I have memories of Amritsar around that time. And I have memories of when the 84 attack happened. I was very young. We lived not too far from the hotel, within like line of sight from the top of our building to see Harmandar Sahib, the complex. And I remember being very young. I remember being on the roof with my parents or with my mother, and I don't know if anybody else was there, but I do remember seeing it. I have memories of it, but it's more like it was. I think I thought it was like fireworks or something, but I know that from the tension, I knew it was. Well, I think I had a sense that something very serious was going on. And then my mom told me afterwards that we basically just stayed in. There was a curfew. We were scared to go out, and we were there with like no food and very little water for almost a week, until eventually my granddad was able to come in, like get to us, with a rickshaw and just get us out of the city. So and then we moved to the UK, and a lot of my memories around that, like I mean, that was top of mind what was going on in those years, right? So when I did the painting with Swan in color, a lot of that came back to me, because I remember just growing up as a kid, always seeing those photographs. They used to have this magazine that was always like released almost like weekly or monthly, that would tell what was going on back home, and the photos are horrific. So a lot of that stuff was just really kind of, it's all in there.
You made it out of Punjab. If you had stayed there, we might not be doing this podcast today in the exhibition. And
yeah, because my generation, that's a generation that's almost just like wiped clean from that, because then I was like 7, so as for the next 10 years, things are pretty bad, and there's plenty of kids who are like as young as 12, 13, 15, 17, that just disappeared from that generation. I do feel that's why I sort of feel a responsibility to sort of talk about that, explore that, and I hope to do more of that. Like I plan to do more on that topic. It's not something I'm really ready to let go. But at the same time, you just do it as things come,
Well, thanks for sharing that. I always ask all guests, because this is geared towards a younger generation, what one piece of advice would you give to the younger generation? It's a very broad question.
Right. Ooh, geez. Honestly, I think if it's in terms of creative pursuits, I just think they really ought to take the time to unplug, like what we've been talking about, and just it's boring, but read books, go on a sort of a slower wavelength. It's like, you got to turn the dial down on the treadmill and just kind of like absorb more, and just be aware of like what's really valuable in life. I feel like it's frightening how much we waste, how much of our lives are wasted being plugged in to social media, to the screen, and it's like your whole life could kind of go by. And it's just, it's a cliche, but you just can't. Time moves faster and faster the older you get. And I can't believe that I'm 15 years into my career. I still remember being very early, the early years, and it's amazing that that's just gone by. So even now I'm in my 40s and I am trying to really slow down and really try to like be more introspective, try to appreciate every day, and just focus, keep focusing on my growth, but really just sort of, and also just not be so like hard on yourselves too. I think it's a two-pronged thing. We're given all these sort of drugs of sorts that slow our growth, and at the same time we're fed this sort of constant do more, this quote's gonna solve it for you, this attitude, and a lot of it's such nonsense, when they tell you, it's not about this. It always seems to point out that it's your attitude, it's your shitty attitude, that's why you can't like succeed. So it's almost like saying that it's like, it's not this world that is very challenging. It's not these environments that are challenging. It's not that like generally year by year, it's not, things aren't actually getting easier, but getting harder for people to do the things that we took for granted, like owning a home or being able to raise a family, all these things. And then, so there's a lot of stuff that's being thrown on people now, younger kids too, as if it's somehow their fault. And it's not their fault. It's the state of the world we live in, the world we've created, the economics we live by. So I think I would also just say, yeah, don't be so hard on yourself. Things are harder for you than they were for people 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think I really like that, because I was on the Basics podcast yesterday and we were talking about men's mental health, and we were talking about how men, there's this bravado that everything's fine, and you're trying to do everything, you're trying to juggle family life, work, look after your health, try and do some Simran, all these different types of competing priorities. And on top of that, you got social life and TV and like things that people do to relax. And it's really important to, I think, go back to like when I was in Punjab for a year when I was younger. It was a really simple life. We had no TV. You spent time with your grandparents. You played with the other kids, and it was a much happier, much better life. So I think the more we go towards the Western model of, you got to be more and more alone, in terms of like separate households, and relationships seems like there's more and more breakdown of relationships, more and more breakdown of marriages, kids, people have less time for their kids. They're on this kind of rat race, on this wheel, trying to earn more and more money so they can keep up with the Joneses. And it just seems very contrary to how we're meant to actually supposed to live a kind of content, fulfilled lifestyle. And we're chasing goals that aren't our own. We want to, people want Lamborghinis and all this kind of stuff. But like you said, plenty of miserable rich people, and as do I.
Yeah. I pretty much only know miserable rich people. I'm trying to find a happy one.
Yeah. So
no, because it's just like it's like a damned if you do or damned if you don't sort of situation. If you don't succeed, it's your fault, and if you do, well, turns out you're not happy anywhere. And I think that's why more than ever, like, Sikhi is just so important, and really sharing these messages is really important. I think it's just like we're in a situation where people need a path out, they need a way forward, And that's why I think it's just, and that's why reframing like our history, not as something that just it's our history, but it's rethinking Sikhi is like a message for the world. It doesn't belong to us. Nobody has ownership of it. And as a Sikh, your responsibility is really, if anything, just to project that message outwards, to share it with as many people as possible. So in whatever platform you're able to do that, however many people you're able to reach, you're doing enormous good. It's like you can just be the messenger. Like the message has already been packed beautifully for you. Just be the messenger. So, and that's become my sort of goal with my work. And the thing is, when you reframe your goals that way, it just gives you enormous motivation. Like absolutely just enormous motivation. So you don't burn out. You're not so bothered if, this thing didn't work out, or this didn't earn you whatever it was supposed to, or people didn't appreciate that. You just know that collectively your efforts will be rewarded.
Amazing. If people want to reach you and tell you about the impact your exhibition has had on their life, or the book, once they come, how can they reach you? How can they connect with you?
Well, I do just check any comments on social media about any particular piece, like I'm controlled with myself in terms of how much, I do see that. I don't want to just knock it. It is a wonderful way to engage with people who are interested in your work. So as much as possible, they can always reach out to me on that. If they want to read, but I've received just beautiful messages where people have just emailed me. So my email is it's contact@artofpunjab.com. And you want to send me a message, I'm always happy to read them. Part of that is what we're actually going to be discussing with the Art of the Mind talk that we're doing at 5:30 on Thursday. And it's really going to be, I think, like, I mean, if I get a chance, I will try to read off some of these wonderful messages that I've gotten. Because the thing is, people have said, my brother was having a really hard time because a lot of my work was done, it was all done like post 9/11, where it was really difficult to be a Sikh. It's really difficult to maintain your identity for a lot of people, and they just, and I've had messages saying, my brother was having a really hard time, but then, I gave him your painting, and that gave him just, that reminded him why, right? It said a lot better than that, but it was a really moving thing. And this person was thanking me, but I would just want to say thank you, because when I sort of lose my way and I don't know why, I like to read that those messages. They help me. They fuel me. They give me a sense of direction too. So
what a beautiful thing for your work to have like that impact on someone's life.
Yeah. It's good to have sort of like, the longer you're doing something, to be able to frame what you're doing with beyond the goals of like, I want to be able to pay the bills and I want to do this. You really want to say, well, what's the wider purpose? Because I find that with people that are successful in the way that we define success commercially, they get a lot of accolades initially. Yeah, you're an investment banker, you're a this, that, surgeon, whatever. Well, not surgeons, they do great work. But I'm gonna say, like, they get a lot of accolades initially, but then I think as you get older, that sort of you need to have some sense of purpose, and once you have a sense of purpose, then you can I don't know, it could just it carries you is all I'm really trying to say, so it's wonderful when people reach out to me and say what impact my work had.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know that I missed this question earlier, but it was about fatherhood, because I'm a dad, and I often get asked about people who looking to get married or looking to start a family, and they're always asking for advice. So do you have any tips? Because you have kids, you have a beautiful family.
Yeah, I think the one thing I do tell anyone who, have their first child, I always just say, like, it's so cliche, but the time goes by so quickly, So if I would pay, like, I would empty half my bank account if I could just, like, step back to, like, 10 years ago or 5 years ago and see my kids at that age on a day where I was busy doing something that I don't remember now. So it's like you just want to try to absorb as much of it as possible.
That's
If you're
beautiful.
fortunate enough to, have kids and have that, then just soak it in, because it goes by really quickly.
It's amazing. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the seva that you've done. It's really means a lot to me, to my family, to my network, and the community as a whole. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, so thank you for your time today. And I'll see you in Birmingham.
Yeah. Please come to Birmingham. Just check out this amazing exhibition that a lot of people put hard work into. It's free. It's open to everybody. And it's going to be there. So check it out.
Amazing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.